This is a News Channel 3 Town Hall. Your voice, your future. Here is your host, Erica Mokay.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Erica Mokay. Millions are taking to the streets to raise their voices in response to the killing of George Floyd. But for many, the message is much deeper. The injustices Black communities face don't start with George Floyd. So tonight, we're dedicating this newscast to starting the conversation of how to move forward as a community and stop the visible threat of racism and inequity Black Americans face across the country and even in Kalamazoo. Joining me tonight are your local leaders. Kalamazoo City Mayor David Anderson, City Commissioner Eric Cunningham, Kalamazoo County Sheriff Richard Fuller, Wendy Fields, President of the NAACP Metropolitan Kalamazoo branch, and local activist Marshall Kilgore. Thank you all for being here tonight. Now, we do want you to know that we reached out to the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety early in the week, and they said they would not be sending a representative on their behalf. KDPS tells us they had a previously scheduled meeting at this time to discuss the events of last week. That meeting is closed to the public. Kalamazoo City Manager Jim Ritzma was also set to be part of this conversation, but later let us know he could no longer commit. But you at home, you are also a big part of this discussion, and we want you to join in. Our own Andy Dominianni is keeping track of your comments on our Facebook and Twitter pages. We will check in with him at some point this evening, so make sure you keep those questions coming. We have watched from coast to coast protests against police brutality intensify in the past few weeks. Many feel we're on the brink of change, while others feel a centuries-long divide is only deepening. So let's start there. My first question to our panel is, how did we get to this point, and what do you feel is different now? And I would like to direct that question to Miss Wendy Fields. Wendy.
Well, having lived in Kalamazoo all my life, 66 years, this, as it's already been stated, is nothing new. This has been ongoing since I can ever remember, from the riots in the 60s to the busing of us from our neighborhoods to predominantly white areas where we were not received well, to the discrimination that we felt in schools, in employment, in our criminal justice system. This is not new. And so what has happened is watching that man die before our eyes with his breath being suffocated out of his body, watching him call out for his mom, that was a gut punch. And so it's out of the past and out of what has happened systemically that we are where we are now with the anger. And you look at people there risking their lives, their health, with COVID-19 being there, but that's how angry it is. And it's something that needed to happen, and it's something that is happening, and I think everybody has a part to play in all of this.
Commissioner Cunningham, your thoughts?
You know, to piggyback on what Wendy stated is, you know, similar scenario. Growing up here in Kalamazoo, you know, from a qualitative standpoint, I understand the story because it's a lived experience. But I think the unique part about what we're dealing with right now is that, you know, we're seeing our family members, our friends, our co-workers, our neighbors go out into the community, and they're individuals who aren't of color. And they're helping to, you know, push, you know, this movement forward for change. And so I think overall, we're in a unique space as a community. The most important piece about this space is that we have these type of dialogues and these type of conversations. And I think it's going to be important for the change that's needed as we move forward. And so, you know, all voices need to be at the table. All voices need to be considered. And so that's kind of the piece that I'm looking forward to.
Mr. Kilgore, what's different now? What are your thoughts?
What's different now is folks, racists have a ringleader who's standing from the most powerful point in the nation and in the world. But what is also different is we have taken a stance that we are demanding justice and equity, demanding that we are done dying. And so that's what's different, is the essence of the movement is one that will not be stopped and cannot be stomped out by even the ongoing pandemic that we're seeing right now. So what's different from the 60s to now is we also have amazing allies in office too, who are demanding justice with us. And that's what's fantastic that we're seeing.
Mayor Anderson?
Thank you so much, Erica. First, I want to thank you for being part of putting this on. I think it's so important that we have these kind of town halls. Commissioner Cunningham and I have been doing Zoom-style meetings for some months now. So what is different now? I am not entirely sure that so much is different now. When I think about this, an ironic thing comes to mind, and that is something that Martin Luther King said in 1963 in the March on Washington. And he talked about the fierce urgency of now in 1963. And coming out of those times, I've been around a long time in Kalamazoo, as President Wendy Fields has at the NAACP, and I demonstrated. I went to cities and publicly was part of demanding change what seems like a lifetime ago. And here we are again. So if I had to identify what is different for now, is that I believe we've been going through something over the last couple months where day by day, the veneer of what covers up the disparate lives that people live in this country related to their economic status, their health status, has been pulled away and pulled away day by day. And as we get to what is seemingly a somewhat of an end of that, we have a gut punch where we witness in the worst way possible the killing of an individual by people who are supposed to protect and serve. I am hoping that what is different now is that now white people are recognizing that there have been policies and practices in place that have contributed to this mess. And it's our time to step up and make sure we do something about it.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. Sheriff Fuller, your thoughts?
Well, how did we get here? I would say that it's something that was started way before any of us were here. And I will say that the redlining that took place here in Kalamazoo itself, as well as across the nation, has played a large part in helping us stay where we are, in a place where there are a minority of people being held out of the benefits that a larger part of the community sees. And what we're thinking has happened now with the change is that there's a lot more media that has shown immediately the effects of some of this long-stemming systemic racism that is right in front of our faces. And now with social media, it goes worldwide and it goes fast. And so more people are shocked, more people are ready to stand up, and more people want their voice heard to make sure that somehow we change these practices and we make sure that our nation can be whole instead of be split apart by the dissension that is created by racism.
Now, speaking of those changes, Sheriff Fuller, there's a big call right now for a change in police practices, but there's one movement that stands out foremost, and that's what's called defunding the police. Even the president and former vice president, now the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, they have both addressed this. Let's take a listen.
There won't be defunding. There won't be dismantling of our police.
I don't support defunding the police. I support conditioning federal aid to police based on whether or not they meet certain basic standards of decency and honorableness.
Commissioner Cunningham, this one's for you. You've actually said that we have to explore defunding and dismantling the system. Can you explain what that means to you and what that could look like for Kalamazoo?
So I brought this up to my colleagues about 2 or 3 years ago in regards to defunding. I think that what we're seeing across the country is, we shouldn't have a cookie cutter approach. Every community has different scenarios and issues that they deal with. to whatever differing degrees. As it pertains to the city of Kalamazoo, when I brought this up a few years ago, my line of thinking was, how can we change the next generation? So how do we, my specific mind was, how do we start removing these funds in a symbolic gesture at the very least and start putting them maybe into our parks and recs here in the city of Kalamazoo? So, a part of it is, having a clear understanding that a lot of the change that we really want is A, for our youth, and two, that's where it really starts. So I think that's the piece that I hone in on specifically. Right now, it's an open book. I know for the City of Kalamazoo, the City Commission, as we move forward, my main ask of all of my colleagues, all of those that I'm tasked with to manage, is keep an open mind. When I brought this up a few years ago, it fell on deaf ears in differing degrees, but now, because of the community and the nature of the things that we're dealing with right now, we're demanding that these conversations be had, and we find a clear path forward together. So,
Eric, to follow up on that, in your opinion, would that be getting rid of police or just shifting funding?
So, I think for us, it has to be the gambit of conversations. It's got to go everything from dismantling completely to maybe we need to add 700 more officers. I think we have to explore every single conversation and everything in between. I think the community, as they see this conversation unfold, they'll start to identify what they're looking for and what they want and what they need. And it's up to us as a city commission to really oversee that and make sure that we're in tune with our community and express those needs as we sit at the table. So from an advocacy standpoint, right now, it's too soon to just hone in on one specific idea, one specific thought. My expectation of our city manager is that we explore everything.
Mm-hmm. I do want to reiterate that KDPS, they were invited but were unable to attend this evening. But I want to go to our law enforcement representative here, Sheriff Fuller. What are your thoughts on these ideas? And if the role of KDPS were to change, what would that look like for your department?
Well, I really don't want to talk about what the role of KDPS is or what if that was to change. I can talk about the Sheriff's Office. And when I talk about the Sheriff's Office, we are the second leading agency in the county of Kalamazoo that make arrests across the county. And so when we talk about defunding, what would happen is there would be huge swaths of people that would be underserved. And so there are things that, and that's if we talk about totally removing law enforcement. But I don't really think that's what people are talking about. I think they're asking for a real idea forming, a real conversation with leaders across the board, and that they're asking for different ways of doing business. One of the things that I've looked at for the longest time is to see about getting a nationwide mental health objective for law enforcement. The men and women of law enforcement may go for years seeing many different traumatic events and never have to go see a mental health provider. And that is something that does cause harm in the long run, and we want to do what we can to make sure that they are ready to serve their community and that they're more prepared to serve their community. And so if we talk about changing funding, one of the things I would say is that we make sure there are fundings for the mental health of the people who provide the service. And at the same time, there are different programs out here that we could easily do that do cost money. That's the problem. When I say easily, it's just about money. And if we had the dollars for this, we could put teams of counselors with law enforcement officials to go to so many of the calls that we have. When I started in law enforcement 35 years ago, a trouble with subject call was usually somebody that was intoxicated on the corner, harassing somebody, something pretty significant. But now we're getting called to the homes because a parent is not getting along with their 8-year-old. We're getting called to the homes because a 43-year-old who lives with her 63-year-old father had her cell phone taken from the father, and now dad won't give it back, and they want us to be the mediators. There's got to be a better way of handling this type of call to leave law enforcement for the actual crimes.
All right, Sheriff Fuller, thank you very much. Another thing that's a big topic is that there needs to be some type of reform, especially when it comes to training, and retraining is necessary. Right now, Kalamazoo Valley is the only police academy in the state of Michigan to offer a racial sensitivity program that teaches cadets about implicit bias, cultural awareness, and the history of police interaction with Black Americans. Now, we talked to the director of that program about why he feels this is imperative. Here's what he had to say.
It started out as white officers were saying that they didn't know any positive people, any positive Black men specifically in the community. Everybody who they dealt with, they arrested before. And so that gives you a mindset. You start to think that all Black people are criminals.
And we are fortunate the man you just heard, Vic Ledbetter, is standing by to contribute to this conversation. He is alongside our Tavarius Haywood. Thank you both for joining us.
How you doing, Erica? Again, I'm here with Victor Ledbetter. And Vic, my first question, that's such a dangerous thought process. That's such a dangerous thought process. Do you think that's a mindset that we could possibly change?
Absolutely. What happens is when people keep doing things repetitively, they seem to think that that's all that happens and can happen. So when the officer said they had a mindset because they kept arresting people of color, they thought that all Black people were criminals. So it was very important for us to show them that that's not the case, because you have some great people of color, especially Black people in our community. So we made sure that they came in contact with them in a safe space so that they can actually have conversations and meet people where they are. And that helps them as they go forward. So that's why we focus on that.
How do we get more Black or minorities to apply for these sorts of programs?
You got to go looking for them. The common thing that you hear is we can't find them. I disagree with that. There are people of color, Black people specifically, who want to be in police work, who want to do this work, but departments refuse to go exactly where the people are. At one point, I'm from North Carolina, and the college I went to has an outstanding criminal justice program, and we were going down there recruiting and bringing up here, and that worked well. But people thought that they just wanted people from this community, which I can understand and respect, but you didn't get the numbers. So now they're not going anywhere. So you have to go where the people are, but they're out there to do that. The main thing that I've been seeing when I talk to people, they want to be in this field, but because of the relations and the things that are going on, they're kind of apprehensive about it.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Vic. Erica, we'll toss it to you back in the studio.
Tavarius and Mr. Ledbetter, we thank you for that. So I want to direct this question to Mayor Anderson. So again, just to reiterate, Kalamazoo Valley is the only police academy in the state to offer extensive diversity training. So why not, are all of our local officers sent to this training, this diversity training? If they aren't, why not?
So Erica, that is a very good question. And first I want to say is that I 110% support the fact that individuals who intend to be public safety officers need to get this training, not just once, but ongoing. More so, I believe that individuals also need to know their communities and know people in their communities. And we used to have a very robust program doing that, actually, back during the time when Victor Ledbetter served honorably on the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. There's a couple little details and issues right now in terms of some things that have to be worked out between Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety and this training program. This is where cadets have long gone, and I think those details are going to be worked through, and I think that's going to be solved, and our training is going to come back here to Kalamazoo where it should be.
All right, Mr. Anderson, thank you very much. Some may think that racial injustice, implicit bias, and police brutality are all nationwide problems or all national problems and not present in our own community. But in 2012, a study that was paid for by the city of Kalamazoo and done by a Pennsylvania-based consulting firm found that Black people behind the wheel of a car were 2 times as likely to be pulled over compared to someone who is white. Now, that said, the department is under different leadership now and has since implemented several changes and reforms since that study was done and released. Nationally, more recent studies show even more evidence of racial issues. According to the Washington Post, Black and Hispanic Americans are killed at a much higher rate than white Americans by police. But we know this issue does not start and stop with police. We also know that racism is rooted in so much more. So, to Mr. Kilgore, law enforcement, all law enforcement, police aside, in your opinion, where does change need to start, and how does that happen?
That happens simply by comprehensive criminal justice reform, and that's from the bottom up. So the officers on the ground to the folks who do intake. I think of Sandra Bland, the African-American woman who was murdered by policemen, but was in the care of folks within that jail. So we have to remember that it's not just our patrolmen and women, it's also the folks who are doing intake. It's also our judges. It's also our prosecutors. Comprehensive criminal justice reform is gonna look very different than what we have today. And you know, I'm ready for all of our cities to adopt 8 Can't Wait, a campaign that would be the first step to that, especially within communities first. Which is addressing excessive force within patrolmen and women. So it starts from the bottom up, but it has to start now because criminal justice reform is going to look like something we have not seen. We have not seen the correct way of policing with Black and brown lives in America yet.
Ms. Fields, as the president of the local NAACP chapter and as a mother, what do you think needs to be happening at home with both Black and white families?
What I think needs to be happening at home with both is a conversation. I think that one of the things that, when I think back over my life, I can remember our parents talking to us about racism, about not going certain places, different times of days, make sure you're not in a predominantly white area, when it's nighttime, telling my brothers the same thing. So we knew we had to talk for the boys, we had to talk for the family. And I think that we, particularly as African American, in my opinion, dropped the ball because in the generation of my children, we didn't necessarily talk and educate our children on the ugliness of racism and the risks that they face. And so here we are again, my son who's 44, I've had the talk with him about racism, about where not to go, about where he needs to put his hands when he's driving. We've had those talks, but I also think that whites have to talk to their children because only whites sometimes can get through whites to help them understand what racism looks like, to help them understand that in order for things to move forward, in order for us to come together in a unified way, we have to talk about differences. We have to be able to celebrate those differences, but we, more than anything, have got to have the conversation because the way the system is set up, we have white privilege, so we have white folks who think that they don't have to ask or have to conform to anything but their own privilege. And I venture to say, if you were to ask a white person how often do they think about their race, they will probably look at you like you're crazy and say never. But then you ask a Black person or a person of color, it's from the time they get up to the time they go to bed. So we are constantly under stress, and then you ask why our health needs or our health illnesses is such high and at a disproportionate rate. It's that undue stress that we are facing every day, all day. So yeah, we have to have the talk, and we have to be authentic, and we have to tell the truth, and we have to speak truth to power.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. I do think we need to revisit that. But now I want to check in with our Andy Dominianni to get an idea of what people are saying online about this conversation. Andy.
Erica, lots of activity on our Facebook and Twitter pages at WMT News. A lot of back and forth politically, as there usually is. Some pretty racially charged comments, but quite a few very good Very insightful questions. Will those in leadership roles sit down with the Black community soon to get a real understanding of their concerns and the intended meaning of the Black Lives Matter movement? Another great question, will the city or county move to make racism a public health crisis, as other cities have done recently? And one more comment that will raise many questions, talking about if someone just obeyed the police and didn't resist arrest, there would not be violent consequences. Erica will delve into those and get the opinions of our panelists coming up on social media.
All right, Andy, thank you so much. And thank all of you at home for sending in your questions and participating. We are going to answer more in just a few minutes. So be sure to join us on Facebook now, where that discussion continues. Our panel, again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. One more thing, if you were looking to see Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist speak, our Mackenzie Frost spoke with him earlier today. We are going to have that for you coming up in just a couple of minutes. You'll find that online, where this conversation is going to continue. Obviously, this is an ongoing conversation. We are just scratching the surface. This is all the time that we have here on TV tonight. But again, we are going to continue this conversation right now on our WWMT Facebook page. We invite all of you to join us there. On behalf of all of us here in the studio, we thank you for watching. Have a good night. We're going to move right along. Michigan has never had an African-American lieutenant governor, that is, until 2018. Garland Gilchrist, who was born in Detroit. Political reporter Mackenzie Frost sat down with Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist today to find out what it's like for him as a state leader in a time of civil unrest and change.
This is an important topic for a lot of people, especially right now. You're the first African-American lieutenant governor, the highest ranking African-American in state government. Do you think about that every day when you go to work? Or what's that like for you?
Well, thank you for having me and thank you for the opportunity. It's something that is certainly on my mind, especially in this moment as we think about there are so many communities across our state, communities of color, the Black community in particular in Michigan, really feeling like this is a moment of exhaustion mixed with this anger, mixed with the need for change, and wanted to make sure that I'm setting a good example for leadership and the kind of reflective and responsive leadership that only happens when you have true representation. Like, I think about that every day.
What do you think is at the root of the frustration and, like you said, the exhaustion of people right now?
When people think about when they felt the most safe, it's because they felt invested in, because they felt nurtured, because they felt supported. And we only want that, and we want that for communities across the state of Michigan. I don't want your zip code or the name of your city to dictate whether or not you feel invested in as a person or whether the communities feel invested in. And so that's why I think this moment just feels like the culmination of that call for justice and that call for equity.
You're a parent. What worries you about your children growing up right now?
Well, yeah, I have my baby girl will be 1 next week. I have first grade twins. And actually it's been an interesting moment because we've been able to talk about what it means to demonstrate. We've been able to talk about what it means to be in the street, like literally being able to have them outside or to see them, have them look out the window of my home in Detroit. We can actually see where the demonstrators have been marching downtown. But my goal ultimately as a public servant is to create the conditions for my kids to feel like they can live their dreams and be their best selves in Michigan. I want that for every child in our state.
When you were growing up, did you ever experience prejudice in any aspect of your life?
Yes, directly. The first time I had an interaction with law enforcement was when I was 14. The first time I was pulled over by the police unjustifiably for going 24 in a 25 on my way to high school when I was 16, making me late to school, with an officer questioning why I was a block away from my high school with a backpack in the passenger seat.
You know, you're in such a high position in the state of Michigan, and you've had some of these same experiences that people across the country are having with law enforcement right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, that is still possible. If I go outside with a different outfit on, I could have one of those experiences today. So I think that we need to be really cognizant of the fact that this is people's real lived experience. This is not a theoretical exercise for people who are yearning for reform and yearning for change in this very visceral way. We are capable of designing a way for us to do relationship building between law enforcement and the communities that law enforcement serve, to remove that wall of separation, that wall of fear, that wall of prejudice. We can break down those walls in Michigan and show how this can be done, where we all, again, are aligned on the same team, moving forward, investing in our communities, investing in our children, and building that brighter future. We can do that.
Now, we also spoke with Governor Gretchen Whitmer to get her thoughts on this topic. You can find that right now on our website, wwmt.com. All right, just want to reset the scene here for you. Thanks for joining us. This is our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Erica Mokay. We are going to continue this conversation right now. Hopefully you are joining us here online. Joining me tonight are your local leaders. We have Kalamazoo City Mayor David Anderson, City Commissioner Eric Cunningham, Kalamazoo County Sheriff Richard Fuller, Wendy Fields, president of the NAACP Metropolitan Kalamazoo branch, and local activist Marshall Kilgore. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. We do want to let you know that we did reach out to the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety earlier in the week, and they said they would not be sending a representative on their behalf. KDPS tells us they had a previously scheduled meeting at this time to discuss the events of last week. That meeting is closed to the public. Kalamazoo City Manager Jim Ritzma was also set to be a part of this conversation, but later he let us know that he could no longer commit. All right, now we want to check in with our Andy Dominianni. Andy has been keeping track of what people are saying online, and you're getting a lot of questions and comments. So Andy, what's the overall response been?
Oh gosh, there's thousands of responses coming in on various social media platforms right now, Erica. A lot of good comments and a lot of very insightful questions as well. Some of the more recent ones I want to present to you, although of course we can't actually pose all of these to our panel. Coming in from Joe in Kalamazoo, how do we, the citizens of Kalamazoo, get involved or volunteer to make meaningful changes and create a more inclusive city where people of color can achieve prosperity? Also from Khadijah of Kalamazoo, are those in leadership willing to have sit-down conversations if they don't fully grasp what Black Lives Matters mean? And are they willing to be open and listen and immediately act once they come into the knowledge of two different worlds? And Mark says if you would just obey a policeman and not resist, there would be no consequences, plain and simple. And I think that transitions well into a question, Erica, I'd like the panel to address. Coming from Bonnie, what do you think the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety is doing right? And how can Kalamazoo create the best candidate since many people are no longer choosing this profession? And what does KDPS need to improve on?
I'm going to present those questions to, let's start with Mayor David Anderson.
Do you mind repeating the question?
Oh, the question was, what is KDPS doing right and what is KDPS doing wrong? What can we do better?
So just a couple things I just want to bring up quickly at the beginning of that is that obviously the most visible and in some ways, physically brutal place where we see interactions that result that are driven by a racist approach is in our public safety departments, in our police department. That kind of thing that doesn't get taped still happens in folks' lives in all kinds of venues, whether you can't get a mortgage, can't get a loan for something, don't get a job for whatever reason. That is just as brutal, and that happens every day in people's lives. But what are we doing here? One thing I can say is that in the time I've been on the commission, we have been committed to the fact that the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety should be a community-based policing entity. And we adopted, for example, the 21st century policing model that came out under the Obama administration. That is treated as a Bible on policing. And we're working right now for the last several years on changing policies related to use of force, related to reporting other public safety officers when there's inappropriate use being used by another officer. We've been talking about those things a lot lately. But what is not working? If all this were working, there would not be issues with people who still feel like you're talking about that, you have policies you're working on, but my personal experience is not that. So that is where we have to get rid of the disconnect and really work on the ground what is not working.
At this point, there isn't a right answer, and that's why we're having this conversation, so we can move forward to find the right formula. Now, I do want to pose this to everyone on our panel, and we can maybe do a show of hands at who wants to answer, but if we're going back to the topic of defunding, 48% of Kalamazoo's general fund goes toward public safety. That includes police and fire. Now, if we were to defund police and move those funds around, where do you think some of that money should go? Who wants to answer that first or weigh in on that first? Anyone? Mr. Kilgore.
Yeah, being an education advocate, 100% education. We've got, we've got a beautiful community. We've got the Kalamazoo Promise. We value education in our community. So I know 100% education as well, but also the folks who surround those educators, right? Our social workers, our parapros, all of the folks who are helping our students within schools. That's where it needs to go, because education is the key to all of this. If we'd educate ourselves on empathy and justice and equity, we'd be way better off. So we need to uplift that within our schools. So I really don't like the whole defunding. That sounds too harsh. It needs to be redistribute and redistributing the wealth instead of because we still do need those services, but the time to redistribute that wealth 100% is overdue.
It does kind of seem like that word is a little misleading, right? You hear defunding and you think it's no money is going anywhere. But one question that our viewers are asking is how that money can be put back into communities of color, specifically entertainment venues where they feel comfortable. Who would like to weigh in on that? Do you want me to repeat the question? Okay.
Please.
I'll ask it to you,
So
Commissioner Cunningham.
the entertainment piece is
Yes. How could that money be reallocated into the communities of color to specifically entertainment venues where they feel more welcome?
Yeah. So, like I said, being born and raised here in Kalamazoo, seeing the historical components, I've had these deep dialogues with our previous chief, in regards to, over-policing certain communities, over-policing certain parties, or over-policing certain venues. And we're running into situations where they get shut down for a myriad of reasons. And so, we see that frustration where individuals of my generation and even younger now, they don't have a place to go. They don't have a place to, express themselves in different ways or relax. So yeah, I agree. Overall, the conversation has to be expansive. Going back to what Sheriff Fuller mentioned, the defunding piece, if you're not for that, I get it. But the piece that is imperative is the change in the standards that need to be held. The change in the standards are, we see statistically across the board in practically every arena where African Americans are at the bottom of the food chain for one reason or another. We saw that in the 2012-13 study in regards to the traffic study, 2 times more likely. Now, where's the accountability? We have a benchmark. That's just one little piece. We have one benchmark that specifically says there is a bias somewhere in this system, and nobody's holding them accountable. So for me, it's, okay, how do we A, hold them accountable, and B, on the back end of it, whether we set that timeline of 1 year, 2 years, if we aren't meeting those goals, then something needs to change, and it needs to be drastic. We've tried these little inches here, an inch there. No, it needs to be intentional, drastic, everything studied from the top to the bottom to get a better understanding. And who are our gatekeepers? Who are the individuals who are making these decisions? And those are the ones that we have to have the deep dialogue and the deep questions. Somebody, asked, how can I get involved? Your intentionality or your ability to get involved is very imperative. It's very important. And it's as simple as this. When you go to work, you ask your boss, hey, what are we doing to improve the quality of life for African Americans? And it's as simple as that. I mean, in this situation, everybody from the janitor on up to the President of the United States has a responsibility. And that's the reality. And so you can't fight statistics, you can't fight the data. That's the bottom line of it. And until we start seeing statistical change, data change, wherever you think your tweaks need to be, that needs to be all inclusive. But more importantly, we need to hold those standards and ensure that there's teeth behind not meeting those standards.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Okay, another question that I have, and I'm going to present this to Mr. Kilgore and Ms. Fields. We saw protests here in Kalamazoo, mostly peaceful. We know that protesters, a lot of protesters, most protesters didn't loot, okay? We also know that people who were looting were not protesting. So, what is your thought? What are your opinions on the people who changed the headline to the violence and the people who were looting instead of the message of the peaceful protesters? Ms. Fields?
Oh, me, okay. I'm sorry, would you repeat the question?
It's how do you feel when the headline turns into the violence and the looting instead of the message of the peaceful protests?
I think it's a sidetrack. I think that it's just a tactic that's used for something negative. What is often happened with us as black folks, the focus becomes on something negative instead of the positive. There were a handful of folks that did the rioting, the destruction, and should have been arrested and gone and taken to jail for breaking the law. But the majority of the people were demonstrating in a peaceful manner, and the focus should have stayed and remained on that and the things that came out of there, because even after those few incidents and people were arrested, what you saw was the peaceful demonstrations, and the demonstrations had to happen and need to continue happening because that's what brought the focus to these issues. And as Mr. Cunningham has so eloquently stated, it's there, it's ongoing, and I'm glad that they are protesting because, as I said before, there's a job for all of us to do. There are those that are out protesting, there are those of us that are responsible for holding some of the other ones accountable, feet to the fire, as we are in conversation with some of those same leadership. I think that one of the things the NAACP is doing, and we should be able to announce it next week, is we are forming a task force to be very intentional about holding law enforcement accountable for some of the things that they're doing now, haven't done, are doing, going to do. But what we do know is that racism is alive, it's well, it happens, it is happening, and with all the training and things that have said that is going on, which there are, I've gone to some wonderful trainings at KVCC. I did the training with the Kalamazoo Public Safety. I know they've got a lot of hard things to do, but I've been stopped for no reason. My keys were taken from me for no reason. I was on my job when they stopped me. I had to call for a sergeant to come to my car, and he had to tell the officer, she's done nothing, let her go. And I went and filed a complaint on that. This goes on daily, it happens every day. It's scary. I get scared for particularly our black boys and men. I am terrified. So shine the light on the negativity. Let's put it on what's happening and what's positive and the positive things that are going on out of this protest.
Mr. Kilgore?
Yeah, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. says that riot is the voice of the unheard. And so we've had this going on, these attacks to our community for hundreds, for centuries. So for folks to think that this is gonna be us holding hands and singing Kumbaya every day until we get change, we've tried that. We sang we shall overcome, and we still will be doing that. But I also wanna address that talking about the looting and the rioting is dog whistle politics. That's a dog whistle because we know that us as black men, we're the dangerous ones, we're the scary ones. So it's a dog whistle to say that, of course, instead of looking at, like the march that I created, the intersectionality between the black community and the LGBT community, you want to talk about broken windows. No, that is a dog whistle, and it's a cop-out to get away from what we really need to address. So I'm done with the dog whistles, and guess what? The intelligent folks know that has been folks, that has been Antifa, that has been white nationalists, that is not the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's not us. And so guess what? Our ears have been turned off to those dog whistles for a long time.
Mr. Kilgore, thank you very much. I want to continue the discussion on the racial sensitivity classes offered here at KVCC and the importance of having minorities be a part of policing. So we're going to take it back to our Tavarius Haywood alongside Vic Ledbetter.
Hey, Erica, I actually attended that racial sensitivity class. Vic, I want to know, how did this idea come about, and why is it important for cadets to attend this class? You actually make it mandatory for them, right?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you came, too. So that experiences, we want people of color, especially in your profession, to come and experience it so you can talk about it, so that this can be a nationwide program. That's what we really want. If every police academy in the nation did it, that would be tremendous. The reason we did it, like I said before, a lot of cadets come from sterile environments and they don't have any diversity in their life whatsoever. So it's important for them to see that people who look like us are not threats, that we should be treated with dignity and respect. And so when we put them in a room with people and have that conversation, that's when you can dispel rumors and things of that nature and just find out what people are from life experiences. And the main thing was to develop relationships. When you were in the program, hopefully that you hooked up with some of these cadets, and now when you see them, they at least know that you're like, hey, that's my brother from Channel 3, and that helps you have that relationship established when you first meet on the street, and that's tremendous.
Thank you so much. I want to toss a question back to Sheriff Fuller. Sheriff Fuller, I want to know what's being actually done by the Kalamazoo Sheriff's Department to intentionally recruit black or minorities for the Sheriff's Department.
Sheriff Fuller, I don't know, were you able to hear that question?
Yeah, I think so. Can you repeat it just to make sure, because you're a little soft on the sound there?
Sure. Tavarius asks, what's intentionally being done to recruit black deputies or minority deputies?
Oh, that's, we go to every academy in the state of Michigan. In fact, we're very fortunate that out to Kalamazoo Valley Community College, my undersheriff, James Van Dyken, is the first instructor that the students at KVCC's Police Academy get to visit with or listen to. And he spends the first hour recruiting anyone in that class that is interested. But besides that, we are constantly reaching out, trying to interact with our community, and we have cards that we actually carry around that say, I'm interested in you trying to come work for us. Please reach out and look for this information. And so we have a recruiting card that we pass out throughout the entire community. And what I focus on is I go to young women throughout this community, and I hand them these cards first, because often it's easily to notice young men in a crowd and say, would you like to come be a police officer? Where I recognize that we need more women in law enforcement as well as more minorities. And so we are constantly here in the city of Kalamazoo at schools, in the schools throughout this county, handing out cards to people that are looking like they're going to be graduating soon. We also go to the community college, and not just the academy, but we actually talk to people at the community college and talk to them about their interest and let them know that we have these positions and we're interested in them coming to work for us.
All right, Sheriff Fuller, thanks. Before we wrap up here tonight, I want to present this question to everyone, to the people here in the studio and the people watching at home. What do you want the lasting impression of this conversation to be? I'll start with Ms. Wendy Fields.
Vote, vote, vote. Complete the census.
Commissioner Cunningham, what do you want the lasting impression to be?
I'll expound on that. Don't be scared of this conversation. Just like, as a city councilman, I have to worry about the roads, and 10 years from now, we'll still be having conversation concerning the roads. I expect this to be a long journey. I expect for all of you in the community to keep fighting this fight. keep bringing this forth between community leaders. And as stated, vote, get involved, and make sure that you're intentional on that piece.
Marshall Kilgore.
Anne Frank says, one of my greatest influences says, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. It's time to amplify our voices and come together. It takes more than just folks, elected officials and activists like myself being on the front lines. I say to you, educate yourself, look up the 8 Can't Wait campaign online, and make sure that education prevails, equity prevails, and empathy prevails. I need your voice. Get off the sidelines and get in this fight with me.
Mayor David Anderson.
Erica, I think the most important takeaway is this, and this really hit me, excuse me, this week. As a person who's actually spent much of my working and volunteer life working on social justice issues, predominantly affordable housing, and realizing somehow again that I have not been doing enough, and that a piece of my focus that has been so important is easy to lose. And why is that? It's because because of the accident of my birth and who I am, do not face issues that other residents of Kalamazoo face because of the color of my skin. And I think the biggest takeaway, it is responsibility must be taken by Caucasian people in this community, in this country, to do what President Wendy Fields just mentioned you do not do if you're a white person in this country, is think about race when you get up in the morning, is you must begin to incorporate that into your thinking about what am I going to do each and every day to make sure that everybody gets to experience the benefits of what we are shooting for in this country, and that is that all are created equal.
Thank you very much, Mayor David Anderson. And finally, Sheriff Fuller.
Until the people of this nation realize that racism is real, racism is dangerous, and racism will divide this country, we're not going to be able to change. And so that has to be something that is realized across the nation by everyone. We have to be able to look for ways to get to know one another better, get to know our neighbors better, and stop being afraid of one another and quit making somebody afraid of us. So it's going to be a nationwide project. It's got to be neighbor and community leader and community groups working together. And we've said these things since 1965 when the last major police reform took place. And I can say that 55 years later, it is more than time to take that giant project on.
Sheriff Fuller, thank you very much. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. We're just scratching the surface. This is an ongoing conversation and we are just getting it started. I thank all of you for joining us here on this live stream. If you missed any of the conversation, you'll be able to find it on our website. That's www.mt.com. Again, thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you for watching and for your input, your comments, and your questions. Have a great night, and again, thanks for watching.